Welcome, everyone. It is a privilege and honor to have you with us today. My name is Molly Rowan Leach. I am founder and privileged to be so as well, founder of Restorative Justice on the Rise. We've been a part of the restorative justice global community, hoping to connect people, advocate for restorative justice within many different pockets of human systems since 2011. We're a podcast as well. We were the first podcast known to focus on restorative justice. So I hope that you're here today. Looking forward to hearing from an extraordinary guest that I'm going to be introducing to you in just one moment, Dr. Deborah Heifetz. Again, it's a privilege and honor to be here with you, and we'll be here for an hour together today for the framing topic, the 8 needs that drive conflict. And this is a special co-host with Brave Hearts International. And we also want to give a shout out and thanks to our event partners, the National Association of Community and Restorative Justice, the Colorado Coalition of Restorative Justice Practitioners, and our longtime friends and publishing house, Living Justice Press. So thank you again for taking time out of your busy day to be here with us. And for those that are unable to make this live, obviously you're probably watching this after the fact, and this recording will be available to everyone who took time to RSVP. So thank you again for being here with us. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our very special guest today, Dr. Deborah Heifetz. It's very important to introduce people to the restorative justice global field that have ideas around and significant work around how we truly respond to the presence of trauma. And I just would like to say, as a practitioner and former program director myself, working alongside courts and with communities, oftentimes it's very difficult to know exactly how to respond. Many of us, if not all of us, know what trauma is, or at least we have some sense of it. And yet we are not mental health practitioners by trade. And yet here we are at the first line of quote unquote defense in how we adequately respond to what the reality is that we're facing in each individual. So I consider it a great honor to introduce to you Dr. Deborah Heifetz. Deborah is a social anthropologist. She's a dancer and a mediator with over 30 years of experience as a social scientist, somatic educator, and peace activist. As co-founder and director of Brave Hearts International, she is a professional facilitator and coach who developed the Human Needs Map, a circular matrix representing the interconnectivity between human needs. Heifetz's background builds on her systems training in dance ethnology under the guidance of Buckminster Fuller's daughter, Allegra Fuller Snyder. She later conducted a 5-year ethnographic study of gender and Israeli-Palestinian security cooperation during the Oslo Accords. Heifetz introduced the concept of non-mediated peacekeeping, where enemy fighters were assigned the role of peacekeeping. She participated in Track 2 Israeli-Palestinian negotiations and co-founded an NGO focused on peace building and community development in Pakistan. In 2012, she expanded her work into sustainability as a peace-building vehicle, co-founding the Israeli hub of the Transition Network, an international grassroots movement. With training and expertise in the trauma healing modality, somatic experiencing, also called SE, and the nonverbal system of human movement, Laban movement analysis, LMA, Heifetz has also educated graduate students in international conflict resolution and mediation, integrating embodied practices into her courses on culture, conflict, and community development. Collaborating with an international community, she bridged academia and community building through experiential education and reflexive learning. In 2013, she co-created Embodied Leadership Training, a global workshop series in Europe, China, and the US, emphasizing the body as a source of knowledge, resilience, presence, and compassion. Participants developed core competencies in communication and conflict resilience for more effective personal leadership to meet adaptive challenges. Deborah is a Chevening Scholar at the University of Manchester and Cambridge University, and recently published her systems-based model of human needs, The Map to Compassion, in MIT's Journal for Awareness-Based Systems Change. The model is a sense-making tool to support reframing beliefs, emotions, and embodied memory. It has been considered a breakthrough framework by founders of human needs theory for its non-hierarchical approach to human needs and for the way human needs and emotions are tied to human development. The model integrates her life work, emerging over decades of action, learning, research, and conflict resolution, from international peace building to the repair of personal relationships. So without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Deborah Heifetz.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Molly. And I'm very happy and touched to be here with all of you. It's been a very emotional day, as you can imagine, the release of the hostages and the emotions that are going on in the Israeli-Palestinian Middle Eastern spaces, and the hope for peace that may be a breakthrough, and the huge relief and the huge anxiety and the huge suffering that's there in the field. So what I'd like to do today is I'd like just to share with you an introduction to my work, and I'm very happy to welcome you to Q&A. I'll share my screen with you so I can put up my first slide, and I'll just start moving forward. My work is really a journal, so to speak, into beginning with ourselves as the starting point. Sort of, I like to talk about that we're sort of at the nexus between inner and outer peace when I think about and work with the model. And so this really is a journey into our own reflection. One of my heroes, my gurus, is Thich Nhat Hanh, and his response to the event of a 12-year-old Vietnamese refugee who was in a boat that then got seized and captured by sea pirates. And this girl was raped, and she then, after she was raped, she threw herself and drowned in the water. So he, of course, struggled with this like any human would struggle, and he came up with a poem. And I'd like just to read you an excerpt of that poem and how this is really core to what we're trying to do here, what I'm trying to do, and I think everyone who's part of this call is trying to do. Poem's called Call Me by My True Names. And these are just excerpts because I don't want to read the whole thing. So do not say that I'll depart tomorrow, because even today I still arrive. I am the child in Uganda, all skin and bones, my legs as thin as bamboo sticks. And I am the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to Uganda. I am the 12-year-old girl, refugee on a small boat, who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am the pirate, my heart, not yet capable of seeing and loving. I am a member of the Politburo with plenty of power in my hands. And I am the man who has to pay his debt of blood to my people dying slowly in a forced labor camp. My joy is like spring, so warm it makes flowers bloom in all walks of life. My pain is like a river of tears, so full it fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all my cries and laughs at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so I can wake up, and so the door of my heart can be left open, the door of compassion. And so the lotus in Buddhist teachings is a metaphor for this work. It inspires a certain movement called the lotus rises from the water, and that symbolizes how from the mud, from the suffering, something beautiful can emerge. And this is what I'm I'm trying to share with you today in my very modest attempt at creating this model. So I will begin by showing you Maslow. So Maslow is a very common hierarchy that we know. We talk about the hierarchy of needs and how the needs progress sequentially. But in my work and my research, I found that it didn't make any sense. It wasn't useful to me. So, for example, we kill and we die for honor or for revenge. How does that make sense for physiological needs as a progression? Or we may work ourselves or give up our love relationships in order to fill our esteem, become more prestigious, become more wealthy. So it wasn't really a helpful tool for me in trying to negotiate with people, talk about how needs were impeding any idea about security, creating problem solving. So I then tried this. Um, this is a sort of a list of different needs theorists. And I was trying to say, okay, now are there any patterns here? And I was influenced by Galtung, who's one of the fathers of peace studies, and his categories. And this is Rosenberg, Marshall Rosenberg, NVC. I think all of you that are involved with restorative justice have been trained in nonviolent communication. But again, these are not needs that people die for. They don't die for play, right? They don't die for spiritual communion, or maybe they do, but I wouldn't, I don't think so. People die and kill for other sort of more physically embodied needs. So what I did is I created three categories, and then the fourth category of power, which one doesn't normally see in the literature of needs theory at the micro level. And I created and I named these other 6 needs, and I added 2, physical aliveness and fairness. And I can talk about more why I did that. As you've heard from my background, I come from a background in movement. And physical awareness I wanted to make as a primary anchor in any conversation about what we do as human beings, because we live as embodied creatures and we live on a spectrum between pleasure and pain. And how we navigate that is really how we navigate our lives. I also, given my experience and my understanding of community and community-based development and human scale development, fairness is an important term, I think, to use rather than justice, because fairness really preferences relationship. Fairness precedes law and order, per se, and justice and punishment. I mean, it's a much older, more understood experience of even our fellow creatures, monkeys and primates, understand fairness and unfairness. Um, so I place this in the model as a underlying driver of human behavior. One sees it in very young children. And for me, that's a certain cross-cultural anchoring that I think is useful when we're trying to think in terms of what can be cross-culturally relevant um, and not so socially constructed. The details are socially constructed, but not the principles. So I organized this in the following way. And I recognized from my dance background, which, in the course that I'm going to be offering together with Molly, I'll break it down more details. But suffice it to say that this is a matrix of interconnected needs. And as a system, all needs impact the other. I broke it down into 4 hungers, which I define in the following way: the hunger for survival, to be in life, the hunger for love, for connection, the hunger for power, to have impact, to be able to express one's voice and to be able to ensure that we're treated fairly, and the hunger for meaning, for direction, for values that anchor us and anchor our communities. So these are the 4 hungers. And for each hunger, there are 2 needs. And each need pair works in the following way. And this is what we explore when we try to make sense about how our needs are deprived, either in the present moment, in the past. How do we create fairness today? How do we create our feeling of being seen and considered today to heal what happened yesterday? How do we make sure that we're going to be safe tomorrow? How do we ensure that we're feeling respected and treated with a sense of dignity? How do we ensure that we're treated so that we can express our will and express our identity of who we are and feel included in who we are among other people who share our identity and share our practices? So these are the 8 needs that I've named and that drive conflict. And they're organized in pairs according to these 4 fundamental hungers. When we feel well, and this is where it begins to get really intriguing, because again, because of my background in the sciences, my first degree was actually in genetics and microbiology. So I mean, I'm sort of looking at human behavior, and I honor our embodied beings. And so for me, it's really useful to try to as a sociologist too, to go, to try to make sense of things from our physical experience. And there are certain physical experiences that we share as human beings. The smile is something that you can see on a blind child or a blind adult, blind from birth, regardless of the culture where they come from. And if you notice in our own embodiment, when we look at a smile, it has an impact on us. There's a feedback. There's not only a feedback when I look at the smile, but there's a feedback within me when I smile, when my face registers, and there's a feedback loop that happens completely unconsciously. So this very basic idea that emotions have a certain wiring, I believe, is very useful to make emotions then a instrument or a database for inquiry. As I mentioned, we have, so if we're feeling well, we feel well and our needs are satisfied. But what happens when we get activated, when we get triggered, when we get angry, when we get sad? One of the definitions of trauma is that it's a fragmentation of self, where the different parts hold different aspects of experience, of pain, of shame, of fear, of rage, of helplessness. So how does one make sense of this. The way I've uncovered it is that during the first stages of life, from the first year of life on to around the third 3.5, we have certain emotions that we can express at the beginning of our lives, but that they become more clear, consistent with social and cognitive development. So when a child, for example, can stand up and stamp their feet, they're more capable of clearly expressing and understanding their will and their capacity to express their will and to throw things than they were able to do when they were born or when they're 1 year old. So the capacity to feel shame and to think of myself as being inherently bad, as opposed to doing something that is bad, which is core to restorative practice, when you can separate the action from the essence of the person. This is fundamental to these first years of life. So I'll stop sharing at this point. That's sort of the core foundation of the model. I did want to show you one more thing, if I may. I'm just going to share again. There's another interesting term. We talk in the trauma field. We talk about fight, flight, freeze, and collapse. Well, one of the ways that we work with the model is to show that, and I, in my humble opinion, I would describe, at least as the model is concerned, the fawning behavior of giving up my own autonomy needs, of not even perhaps knowing what my needs are, which I've created in this diagram, which we call the needs balance chart, where we describe the energy that we give to fulfill the need. As a system, our needs are relatively imbalanced, moving in and out with a sense of mobility and flow, so that the average output is around this center circle. When we find in our lives that we put all of our focus on being seen, or all of our focus on belonging and finding connection through a group, and when we give up our own will in order to feel safe through relationship, that's a strategy. That's an adaptive strategy. That's already rather sophisticated. That's not something that happens at the level of the autonomic nervous system. Which is what, when we describe in the trauma field and we look at, based on the system of polyvagal theory and other theories that describe these fundamental drivers that are pre-conscious, that's a neuroception of danger that triggers a reaction that is not normally accessible to us. That's the level of traumatic reaction that is, I think, is useful to think about in terms of the trauma response. Other layers that are more sophisticated, that are more strategic, which I would call fawning a strategy. So that's just one example of how we would use the model, of how we would describe and help people create as an analytical tool, as an assessment tool. That's one example of how we would use the model as an assessment tool. So that's the foundation of the model. There are many, many layers to what's within that system of 8 needs. So for example, there's certain needs that are in each need pair. You have one need that strengthens the tribe, the group, and another need that strengthens the individual in the group. Because all these needs are linked, are anchored to survival. And so it's at that level when we have compassion at the extent of the anxiety and the fear that's that's foundational to what drives us, and what makes us reactive, and encounter what we call a limbic hijack, where our limbic system and our neocortex, sort of, as Dan Siegel would describe it, when you perceive danger, and if you perceive this piece of the thumb as the limbic system, and this as the base, and this is the neocortex, we stop thinking when we perceive danger, and there's a hijacking. So the use of the model, so it's to help people, first of all, to discover where they are on the model. Where am I on the model, for example? Where are you on the model? To locate yourself on the map, to find out what are your vulnerabilities. Where are you likely to get triggered? What we call our sensitivities and our numb areas. So for example, if I'm with somebody in the business world who's a very successful business person, and they have cut themselves off from love for whatever reasons, they're not very skilled at making a request for intimacy. They've put most of their effort into their autonomy needs, into ensuring that they're fairly treated, and they may go up into esteem and to becoming very successful and powerful in the domain of the business world, let's say. And we encounter clients like this. So the work is, how do we help balance and give people the skills? So in the opposite, for the person who tends to be in fawning, how do you help people discover what is it they really need? Have the courage to stand up and to ask for what they need, to name it. So this is one of the ways in which we work with and apply the model. In the course that we're doing, we're exploring with people their cases from the restorative justice space. So the first part is to first discover where you are on the map, and then find out how you can also work better in your facilitation team, so that you can come to agreements as a team and realize, are you listening? Are you already jumping into a judgment? Because a judgment already limits your ability to be curious. Once you've made a judgment, I would describe that as a reaction. A quick judgment is a reaction. To sustain the discomfort, to allow yourself to be uncomfortable enough and remain curious, to ask questions and to try to uncover what might be some of the deeper motivations behind what people are trying to do or say. What, for example, might inhibit a person from being accountable. So I think that is basically what I have to say up to now, on the model, and about the model. There's a lot more to say, of course, and I'm open for Q&A, and that yeah. So this model is designed for the compassion, to build the compassion both for yourself and for other people as to why we do what we do, so that we can navigate through conflict and transform it into a greater moment of compassion and creativity, creative problem solving. So
Thank you so much, Deborah. And I just want to welcome everybody back in again. And thank you for being here. We have another 30 minutes to engage with you. And I've also provided links to articles from Yale, as well as the MIT piece. So hopefully you see those in the chat and might find those of use. They're excellent, as you can imagine. We welcome in Q&A, of course, constructive criticism as well as curiosity. We welcome any questions about the map specifically, and just want to build a good container of care here today with you. So on that note, we value you showing up in the way that works for you. If you'd like to ask a question live in the chat or in uh, excuse me, asking a question on camera, off camera, as it works for you. So please feel free to do this organically, popcorn style. If you'd like to raise your hand, we'll be tending space, of course, for proper order of questions and engagement. So welcome again, and who would like to chime in? What's alive for you from that presentation from Dr. Heifetz? And I see a question from Anna. Thank you, Anna. And I'm assuming it's okay to read this uh, for Deborah. Yes, okay, thank you. Anna says, do these questions from the model come before a circle process in individual meetings with participants, or are the questions you offered about these models offered during the circle?
You know, that's a great question that I personally would have to defer to Molly, because what I'm doing, I don't have experience leading restorative justice circles. I am interested in drawing information from you. I know that, Molly reached out to me, and she sees Molly, who's, you all know who Molly is. She sees something that I can't see because I'm not a RJ practitioner the way you all are, and she is. And so it's really one of my wishes is I designed the model out of a lifetime of work in a very interdisciplinary way. It's up for people who know how to be in the field to bring the cases so that together we could see the applications and design processes that would be effective. In my work with small groups, in forums that I lead with business leaders, I have created a poster that I pull out on the floor, and people actually walk the map and feel the map, and there can be a somatic experience on the map. But the stories come from them. And the question and what could be done, and I'm thinking about it, brainstorming with Molly, is we're designing a tool to assess where people are likely to get triggered. How might this be helpful in getting the relationships into a greater balance, into the next level of healing? But
Mhm.
But that's where I really have to lean on you to give me that information. I'm not the one with that answer.
And if I may add, Deborah, just that, and of course, I'm feeling the presence of the late Eric Butler, a very good friend of mine, and bless his heart and rest in peace, dear Eric. But we worked together for years, and one of the first things that he always emphasized was this is about centering relationship. And a part of that is all the work that we do before we ever come together in a circle, right? So whether you call that a pre-conference, or it might even look like a conversation, it might look like a restorative conversation. It doesn't always necessarily mean that we're sitting down in an official circle per se. The most important thing is that we're making connections and listening. And the more that we can respond well with presence in ourselves as facilitators, which is no small task, the capacity increases significantly for us to respond well to our clients, to our students, to really truly increase our ability to witness what type of trauma might be showing up, because there is quite a spectrum of it and it's real. And like I said earlier, there is no, we're not mental health professionals, right? As restorative justice facilitators. And yet here we are working with it, and sometimes the first people to see it fully. And so, for example, when we're in pre-conversations called pre-conferences or the pre-work, as Dominic Barter refers to it from restorative circles, we're there to listen to unmet needs of the victim. And I'm going to use victim offender terminology only because of clarity. I actually like to use the terminology from Dominic Barter, which is author receiver. But in any case, the victim often needs to be validated and heard authentically for their concerns, for their anger, for their, for all of the spectrum of things that they're coming to the table with us for the first time with. And so listening processes that embody reflective listening, affective listening, these types of tools that hopefully we've embodied authentically so they don't come off as like some kind of script, help us to then really pinpoint as best we can. And I believe using Deborah's model helps us to understand how to be more effective as because I don't want to speak for anyone else here, but I think that what we're trying to do is increase our ability to leap from being trauma informed to truly trauma responsive. How many of you agree with that or disagree? What do you think? I want to know from you. Like we have a deep need as facilitators, right? To really truly respond. Truly. Yeah. I'll hand it back to you, Deborah. I hope that was helpful. But the heart and the marrow of restorative justice work is how we build and center that relationship with our client and get to the root and cause, as Joe Brummer and Mark Thorsborn, amazing practitioners in this field, always point to that, the behavior is an indicator, and Rosenberg said this too. Violence is a tragic outpicturing of unmet needs.
Exactly.
And that's a paraphrase.
And also, I mean, and so is anger. So that's when it becomes interesting when you look at anger from a place of curiosity. And again, I get back to the picture of that little girl, right? That little girl is angry. She wants to have her way. She wants to feel fairly treated. If we don't feel fairly treated, we get angry. And that's useful if it's skillfully expressed or skillfully felt and then translated into constructive action. So my approach as a somatic practitioner, I would invite people to feel what they're feeling and then be curious as to what their feeling is trying to say. If their feeling could get their need met, what would it be? So if I'm angry because you're not seeing me or you don't care about me, that has to do with love. So anger is not going to be very effective if what I want is closeness. Anger is great for boundaries, but if I want closeness, I need to be able to show my softness, my vulnerability, my sadness. And this is where it becomes really exciting and tender when we're both witnessing ourselves and other people in their emotional landscapes so that we can have greater understanding and compassion for both, and just because it's easier for me and my life, for the victim and the victimizer. And the reason why that language is, I think, useful, not being an RJ practitioner, but useful as a somatic practitioner, it feels that way. And I know you have to reframe it, but if somebody's going to hit me, even though I was teasing them, I'm both the victimizer of the person who I teased, but I'm the victim of getting hit. I had an older brother who used to hit me, so I know about getting hit by older brothers, and it's both and I think that's another layer of what I'm trying to show in this model. How do we hold both and that I'm both victim and victimizer? I'm both the hero and the villain, right? I'm both. And I'm the victim. I'm all three in the drama triangle. So that's really what I'm trying to help develop for people is that expanded capacity to hold both and so that we can then get to another layer of consciousness so we can see and feel that really we are in an interconnected, abundant world. But we have to go down, 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 down into our bodies and feel the pain so that we can also feel the love. So again, it's both and. Yes, Charles, thank you for raising your hand.
Hey, thank you for doing this. This is a place for the world to start and grow from.
Thank you.
My model has three parts: safety, love, and joy. With my background, I see fear as the major component of why we do stuff. Fill in the blank after that. All right.
Mm,
And so, how can you begin to get people to look at where they're coming from, which is what I'm taking from what you're saying? And one of the things that I offer people is the idea of when you're thinking, when you're listening, use the Latin term, but in English, why and who benefits.
mm,
Whatever I'm challenging in my head, whatever I'm hearing, right? Why
mm,
am I processing this? Why are they processing that? And who is this supposed to benefit?
mm.
Me, them, or all of us? If it's not all of us, go back to the why. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Yes, Judy.
I found your needs matrix so helpful to give a language and an understanding to these 8 essential needs that do trigger me. And I'm wondering if you could say just a little bit more about the physical aliveness piece. Um, if you could say a little bit more about that as a need.
So thank you, Judy. So physical aliveness I used to have when I was just developing the model. It was at the middle of the model. It's the place we begin from. And what's intriguing about the need for physical aliveness is that it brings our attention back to the felt sense, which is where we need to go in order to heal. That's core to the various modalities that we use specifically in somatic experiencing. But also when we think of mindfulness, you drop in and feel yourself breathing to calm down and to regulate the nervous system. So physical aliveness is both a need in itself and together with safety is connected to our survival. But what I think is useful, and it's useful in order to be able to be creative in naming what might satisfy my need when you're negotiating needs. And so the physical aliveness and safety needs are actually present in all the other 8 needs. So the fear which you described, Charles, is totally on target with everything that I think so is true. We are afraid of losing connection of love. We are afraid of losing power. We are afraid of being judged as not being good enough, as being bad. And underneath that, those feelings of shame and anger and sadness is fear. And so when we zoom into physical aliveness, then we can begin the process of coming back to ourselves as a resource and as an anchor point for self-discovery and for compassion, which is why this, I wrote this when the article and the book that I'm in the process of writing is the map to compassion. It's how to have compassion for myself through a feelingful inquiry. So it's an ongoing feelingful inquiry, both to myself, but also to the other, so that I can better perceive what's happening inside and outside and between the space. Judy, did that answer the question? Okay, thank you.
We have a couple questions in the chat that while others might be wanting to chime in by video, but again, voice choice is always one of the big parts of any space that we host and co-create together with you. And on that note, if you do decide, and we hope you'll join us, the first session of the full course is on Wednesday. We really wanted this to be something that you could take away with you, no matter whether you decide to join us for the course itself. So I hope we meet that goal today. There will be follow-up email with resources for those of you requesting the article links and more resources for you to take away and use. And we really want to keep you in touch with Dr. Heifetz either way. But we do have a lot that we're going to be exploring together as a connected community. And of course, we hope you'll join us. We do have an option for a $99 opt-in. Payment plans are available, and we never turn anyone away. So if you have accessibility needs, we want to hear from you as well, of course. So let's go back to the chat here. Frieder asks, how can we use the model to help the reconciliation process get the victimizer to understand the harm they have done to the victim so that they can become accountable, and the victim to understand why the victimizer did that harm so they can forgive them? And just a quick footnote, restorative justice, of course, is not a means to an end of forgiveness or even of apology. However, we cultivate those conditions quite verdantly when we do this work well. And that requires, of course, deep attention in the pre-conferencing process. So, Deborah. And thank you for your question, Frieda.
Well, I mean, I would I would look at it in terms of what would it impede somebody to look at their part? It's uncomfortable to be accountable. Sometimes it's really comfortable to have an identity as a victim. And so that it takes you off the hook and it makes you entitled. So to offer people the opportunity how to navigate that, I don't think there's just one way of how to navigate a person out of their victimhood. Personally, again, if a person is interested in extricating themselves from a victim position, I would bring them. I think when we look at trauma, it's the inability to escape harm, and so that is a call for agency. So how can we help a victim claim agency in a more direct way? How can we help them name what they may need or name what they request from the victimizer? That I think would be part of, I imagine, part of the restorative justice process is to give the person who was harmed the space to name what is it that would fulfill their recognition need and their sense of fairness. What you find in international conflict is this dynamic of revenge and of ongoing attempt to achieve an equivalence of pain. And so how do you get by that? It's tough. There's not one answer fits all. I've been in a negotiation. I was one time in an Israeli-Palestinian negotiation. This is back during when the Oslo period was still not dead. But who knows, maybe there's going to be a new moment now of anyone interested in the Israeli-Palestinian scene. This is really a very right moment. And I'm hoping that there will be a new concept altogether of a confederation of states, and that's really futuristic. But it's a possibility. And because otherwise, if you're invested in one narrative that is by definition going to negate another human being's existence, that isn't a call for peace and coexistence. We need to, what I believe needs to move forward is to challenge some of these core identities, to have the courage to have a larger vision, so that we can co-create a shared planet of being both me and you and us in a very unique, beautiful dance, so to speak. Yes, Charles. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry. One of the things that I've tried to present as an open space for people to begin to look at their reactions to their trauma, to their history, right? Is a friend of mine calls it, they're doing the best they can with what they have. I'm doing the best I can with what I have. Right. So something soft and simple like that, to begin to look at not small things, but look at giant things. How are we interconnected? Well, I'm not interconnected to you people. Okay, no problem. Let's test that theory. Take off everything you have on that you could have made by yourself. We're connected. So simple starting places, whether the victim or the victimizer, whatever term you want to use, they're living what they have learned. And the good news is they can learn something different if they understand how everything is connected.
So what you are sort of inviting me is, and this is still an art in progress, right? So the needs model was designed as a way of understanding what's been described by a colleague, the MRI of our subconscious. It's like an MRI of what's inside of us. It's our ego brain. And we want to honor the ego brain because this is what's gotten us to where we are today. But it's not to where we can evolve to, emerge and develop into. It's limited. It is by definition limited because it's limited to being needy. So how can we move from wanting to get love to wanting to give love? Wanting to get power to wanting to give power? Having my tribal identity to having our interconnected human identity. It's that both and consciousness. And that's where we get into the spiritual. That's where, we get into the deeply spiritual truths that those of us who are meditators and are, I believe, probably most of the RJ practitioners, all of us are in some type of practice to keep us anchored in holding the pain, and the suffering and the joy at the same time. How can you do both? It's a skill. So, um, uh, so that's why, I love what you're saying, Charles, because it's exactly the direction of what we see the model being. It is the model of scarcity rather than the model of abundance. But we need to honor, without doing a spiritual bypass, the reality of a perception of scarcity because we have been wounded. And whether by personal wounds, by my father, who was a patriarchal genius, but he was a patriarch nonetheless. Just when people asked me what was my first trauma, it was being born female, being born a girl in my male family. So, and as it was, I have three older brothers and I have three sons and I have four grandsons. So I can arm wrestle and I can throw catch. But I mean, go figure why I was given this joy of playing with boys. And it's this both and capacity that allows us to be daring and to handle the discomfort, which we have to handle, develop the capacity to feel the discomfort so that we can get beyond it. And that's not an easy call. I mean, I'm a grandmother. I've been working on this a long time. Couldn't have done this in my 40s. So it's hard. So, but that's what this is. I mean, I've been around. I went to Cal. I went to Berkeley back in the 70s, and I looked at Hare Krishnas. I said, "Are you guys connected to the pain, or are you just doing a spiritual bypass?" And so this is where the model for me is my call, and the physical aliveness as the body is the way to anchor it in lived experience, in lived embodied experience. And that's where we feel the pain of the rapist. I mean, if I let myself go in my animalistic brain, I can be very aggressive when I think about that. But that's not where we need to go. We need to go towards understanding that suffering that could lose humanity in that way. So we need to I mean, I'm no by no means Thich Nhat Hanh. I work towards it.
So I know, thank you, Deborah. We are approaching the hour already, as is typical for spaces and times like this. I hope that everybody has felt included, and we still want to hear from you. And on that note, we have a couple questions that are both in the chat, and of course, Nancy, you're up next after Jill's question. So Jill, just thank you for chiming in her question. And I hope that's your pronouns, Jill. If you need me to change them, please let me know. So Jill's question, has Deborah thought about how this needs model can be used for historical inherited conflict?
Conflict and trauma. Yeah. I mean, as a sociologist, there's systemic inequality, right? Um, but I guess I'm using myself as an example in the collective trauma that I hold from my grandmother on down. Um, and I would say a similar path for I don't think it would be used any differently in holding the collective memory than it would be the individual memory, because it's, again, it's both and. It's both in me and it's in us. And yeah. And Charles, yes, I could have done it in my 40s if I had had the skills. I mean, if I could be young again, I would have been able. I mean, I love seeing the young people. They're gorgeous. I mean, there's so much deep wisdom that many young people can embody. And it's really tough being at such a speed that's not human scale. And that's a huge challenge. And why we need to slow down and use us elders, and at least I'll talk about myself, as an elder, um, how we can be a resource both to the young who don't really know how you can actually move at a slower pace. In the same way as we did when we used to have phones that you had to actually use your thumb to dial around. Remember that? Little phones that didn't have buttons. Yes, Nancy?
Yes, my question's actually related to Jill's, I think. And I was gratified to hear you talk about that when moving from the concept of scarcity to abundance, we need to honor the experience of scarcity. So I think that ties in with Jill's question, that how are we trauma responsive and not asking people too soon to go into the experience of others when it just seems like such a leap if they've been so repetitively traumatized.
Exactly. I mean, again, if we look at the model, I think one of the reasons that really triggered me to understand the model is by looking at the dynamic. What we see is that there are interesting horizontal and vertical dynamics. And I'll be specific. The need for recognition, the need to be seen, is often resolved by the need for fairness. I mean, they go together. So for example, if there are two apples and you take both of them, that's unfair. I'm left with nothing. But if you acknowledge, hey, look, if you just say, look, I'm really hungry and I know that you're giving up that second apple for me, are you okay with that? I'm really grateful to that. I appreciate that you've seen that I'm hungry. Then I feel seen. that you see that who I am and that I'm acting out of love, and you're being able to have two apples and I have nothing. Because hey, I know how to fast for 4 days. I mean, it's okay. You can have two apples. I'll be okay. All right. So it's that the needs to be seen and recognition are often, I mean, and the recognition need and fairness are often a dance. I mean, that's why, China and Japan, China has never felt truly the apology from Japan, the suffering, or Korea. And so that perpetuation of an unresolved need for recognition can perpetuate conflict. And that's true in many of these other dynamics that happen in the model. But the fairness recognition one is you see that all the time. So, and that's how the model becomes useful, because if you put it on the ground and people can see it and they can step on it and they can name it and then they can become creative with various satisfiers, because what would satisfy my need for recognition is going to look differently than someone else's, right? Because I gave up power for love as a child. I didn't know what my needs were. I just wanted connection, very much a fawning type. Whereas, someone else, my husband, to be specific, grew up in a different way. He gave up love for power. And so negotiating that, developing the skills is an art, is an intention, is an act of courage to deal with our defensive patterns. And what I feel is a defensive pattern, you can guarantee it. If you're going to somebody who has been accused of a crime and is in jail or is in the restorative justice practice, I guarantee they're also feeling defensive, and they have fears and they have anxieties. And that's where it becomes really interesting and hopefully helpful and healing to think of terms of trauma responsive, because what you are witnessing is suffering in these spaces. And hopefully that can be a first step towards compassion and effective action. So, Molly?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, so very much. It's always hard to conclude, given this feels like just the beginning. This is a session that we hope is meaningful to you as you go out into your day-to-day or afternoon or evening, wherever you're coming in from. And it really is a privilege to have people from all over the world have RSVP'd for this. We're not here to make a sales pitch for the class. We want you to feel generative to join us in a learning community, a connection community that we believe answers to a hunger, really, of the restorative justice community. And that's to actualize our ability to respond to real trauma. And just quickly, in my own experience as a facilitator, I will never forget the day that I was in court with a young man whose life was changed really by the fact that our team provided a safe enough space that we built together to acknowledge that he had never been seen truly for who he was. So a restorative justice process is not just a response to a crime or a conflict. It's a transformational opportunity for a life that has meaning and that belongs in this world. And of course, there's all different kinds of trauma and of unmet needs in our world. And can we respond to those with care and with compassion and with accuracy? So on that note, thank you for the honor of being your host today. I hope that we see you in the near future, whether it's in this upcoming course, which starts Wednesday, or at any time, excuse me. And I just want to say, you'll see more from Dr. Heifetz in this field, because I just know that to be true. She's bringing something that is very special. And so thank you again, Deborah, for being here today, for offering this time, and to all of you. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you all. Blessings and Go in peace. Thank you.
Thank you.